morning, America and the rest of the world. Sandra J. Hobson here, stand-up comedian, entertainer, director and producer of boxing documentaries, internet troll to those who need internet troll. This is another episode of Hell for Leather News, the sports segment. I'm trying to grow the platform, so please, by all means, subscribe, like this video, share it, and by all means leave a comment in the comment section, because I enjoy checking out the feedback from these videos that I make, as well as exchanging opinions and points of views with y'all. If you're a detractor and it is your nature to detract, by all means I encourage you to do so, but just know if you become obnoxious while detracting, wow, I'm going to get you. I'm the troll's troll, and trolling me will not be tolerated. So anyway, right? Errol Spence Jr. defeated Yordenis Ugas over the weekend to claim the WBA welterweight title. Errol Spence, the WBC and the IBF title holder, and now Errol Spence has made the challenge to Terence Crawford. Let's stop talking and let's party, is what Errol Spence is saying. And I, for one, I'm very excited about this fight. The welterweight division has always been a rich division. A lot of great fighters pass through the welterweight division en route to the middleweight division. I don't mind saying I had grown somewhat bored with boxing after my contemporaries stopped fighting, my contemporaries being the great Bernard Hopkins, Roy Jones, Oscar De La Hoya, Shane Mosley. I actually fell off just as the great Floyd Mayweather came along. I had to go back and watch a lot of Floyd Mayweather's previous fights to see how good he was. But nevertheless, these new younger guys, these guys who are around the same age of my son, 31, these guys have sparked my interest once again. And oddly enough, the guys who sparked my interest and got me back into boxing were welterweights. Hey, let's start with Errol the True Spence. I'm quite fond of Errol Spence because Errol Spence looks like a close personal friend of mine, a gentleman by the name of Lionel Tribble, whom we affectionately call Nez. Errol Spence is my guy because he looked like he could be Nez's son. After Errol Spence, Sean Porter. Now, even though Errol Spence looks like my friend Nez, Sean Porter is probably one of my favorite fighters. He's a tough, gritty guy. And let's not forget Danny Garcia. I got nothing but love for Danny Garcia. He is from my hometown of Philadelphia, and his father, Angel, man, he's an act all by himself. And then there's Keith Thurman. Keith Thurman, a modern day Muhammad Ali, good shit talking guy. How can you not like a guy who talks shit? And then there's the guy who's bringing up the rear, last but certainly not least, Terence Bud Crawford. Now, Terence Bud Crawford is a guy my son turned me on to. My son absolutely loves Terence Bud Crawford. He speaks highly of Terence Bud Crawford, and I gotta say, Terence Bud Crawford, he is that guy. Terence Bud Crawford, the lightweight champion, the light welterweight champion, and now the welterweight champion. And personally, I would compare Terence Bud Crawford to the great Roberto Duran. Now, not in the form of accomplishments. Duran ruled the lightweight division for a total of 8 years before stepping up to welterweight and taking on Sugar Ray Leonard and defeating Sugar Ray Leonard for the welterweight title. No. The reason why I would compare Terence Bud Crawford to the great Roberto Duran is because Duran was the lightweight champion and Terence Bud Crawford was the lightweight champion. Terence Bud Crawford is a lot more accomplished as a welterweight than Duran was. Duran defeated Sugar Ray Leonard for that title the first time, and then the second time around, Roberto Duran was embarrassed. But Terence Bud Crawford stepped up into the welterweight division, and he has been campaigning hard as a welterweight. Terence Bud Crawford knocking off Amir Khan, as well as two other opponents that Errol Spence beat himself. Terence Bud Crawford taking out Kell Brooks, just like Errol Spence did, and Terence Bud Crawford taking out my main man, Sean Porter. It wasn't cool, Terence. I don't like what you did to Sean, but hey, you got to do what you got to do when you're in that ring. But nevertheless, this is a clash because, again, Errol the True Spence made quick work or beat up on Kell Brook, and Errol the True Spence having a tough and gritty fight against my main man, Sean Porter. Now, I don't mind saying, I think Sean Porter was winning the fight against Errol the True Spence all the way up into the knockdown. It was a tough and gritty fight. Both guys were given as well as they took, but at the end, that knockdown that sent Sean Porter crashing to the canvas in the 12th round, I believe that's what sealed the deal for Errol the True Spence. Now, again, Bud Crawford turned around and stopped Sean Porter in 10. And there are some of you who might say that might be the deciding factor. But wait a minute now. Errol the True Spence just did away with Yordanis Ugas in 10. So this is going to be a tough fight. I don't know who's going to win. Personally, I'm looking to enjoy a great fight with these two. I'm hoping that no one gets hurt. But folks, if you are a true boxing historian like I am, this fight between Errol the True Spence and Terence Bud Crawford, this is a fight of epic proportions. First and foremost, the biggest fight that I ever seen in my lifetime was against Sugar Ray Leonard and Thomas Hearns. But there were some other great fights in the welterweight division that I saw. For example, Felix Tito Trinidad, a dominant welterweight. Felix Tito Trinidad making, I believe, 19 title defenses as the welterweight champion, unifying the title against Oscar De La Hoya. That was a great welterweight fight. Oscar De La Hoya versus Parnell Sweet Pea Whitaker. Oscar De La Hoya versus Ike Quartey. The welterweight division has always been a sensational division. Again, if I haven't said it before, Oscar De La Hoya facing Shane Mosley. Now, I'm not sure if these guys fought at light middleweight or welterweight, but one thing for sure, and two things for certain. Shane Mosley was the welterweight champion, and Oscar De La Hoya was the welterweight champion, and they was rocking and rolling, doing it to it like Sonny and Sonya Pruitt used to do it to it. Again, when I think about Terence Bud Crawford meeting up with Errol the True Spence, this is of monumental importance in the boxing division. Now, again, I would liken Bud Crawford facing Errol Spence to Roberto Duran stepping up and fighting Sugar Ray Leonard. Now, the only difference is, in this case, Terence Bud Crawford stepped into the welterweight division. He won a welterweight title, and he has been campaigning as the welterweight champion. Terence Bud Crawford making numerous defenses of his WBO crown. And again, Bud Crawford campaigning and storming his way into that welterweight division the same way Roberto Carlos Duran stormed his way into the division when he upset Sugar Ray Leonard for the welterweight title. Again, when I think about some of the great welterweight fights that took place, there's Wilfredo Benitez versus Sugar Ray Leonard. Wilfredo Benitez versus Carlos Palomanos. Then, when you look at the tradition of great welterweight champions, again, I believe Felix Tito Trinidad has the record for the most title defenses of any welterweight champion. But before Felix Tito Trinidad or the great Wilfredo Benitez came along, there was another great Puerto Rican champion. And that Puerto Rican champion was Jose Napoles. He was absolutely dominant as a welterweight. In fact, Jose Napoles was the undisputed welterweight champion, and he was so tough, he had to step up and weight and challenged the great Carlos Monzon for the middleweight champion. Back in them days, that's what guys did. There were only 2 belts per division, and when you became the baddest welterweight in the division, 9 times out of 10, you went north to seek another title because guys didn't lose weight and go down. But again, you had Jose Naples as the welterweight champion. You had the great Emil Griffith as the welterweight champion. You had Carmen Basilio as a welterweight champion. You had Henry Armstrong as the welterweight champion. Matter of fact, Henry Armstrong was the only man to hold 3 titles at once. And then there was Kid Gavilan, the Cuban Hulk. He was the welterweight champion. And in my opinion, the greatest welterweight champion of them all was the great Sugar Ray Robinson. I know a lot of you guys out there didn't realize that Sugar Ray Robinson was the welterweight champion because Sugar Ray Robinson largely made his mark as a middleweight. But before becoming middleweight champion of the world, Sugar Ray Robinson was the welterweight champion of the world. And I believe Sugar Ray Robinson won a total of 98 fights before he lost his first fight to Jake LaMotta. So this is the tradition of the welterweight division. A lot of great fighters. And again, in this day, in 2022, Errol the True Spence and Terence Bud Crawford are getting ready to live up to the tradition of the great welterweight fighters of the past, and they are getting ready to lock it. 12 rounds, toe-to-toe. Let's go. 3 minutes. Errol the True Spence and Terence Bud Crawford. Folks, I don't know who's going to win this fight, but one thing for sure and 2 things for certain. I guarantee you that this fight between Terence Bud Crawford and Errol the True Spence is going to be every bit as sensational as all the other great welterweight fights before them. So with that said, folks, I'm pretty much done with this video. I'm going to be doing a lot of broadcasting on this because, again, the tradition of the welterweight division is great. And you know what? While I'm thinking about it, right, how the hell did I leave out the 2 wars that Marlon Starling fought against Donald Curry, or the 2 wars that Marlon Starling had against the great Mark Breland? Again, the welterweight division is just so rich with talent. It's very easy to overlook a fighter because, again, there were just so many great fighters that came through the welterweight division en route to the middleweight division. So with that said, folks, I can't talk no more about this. I'm done with it. Bam!
A little boy climbed an apple tree. He stole an apple, then 2, then 3. And when he started to climb back down, he slipped and he landed on the ground.